Do you ever feel lost or confused about the big questions in life? Do you ever wonder about the nature of reality, the purpose of your existence, or how you should live your life? If you're nodding your head, then you are part of a very long line of thinkers. You see, there is a saying that an unexamined life is not worth living, which was said by Socrates, one of the ancient Greek philosophers. This quote highlights the importance of introspection and self-awareness, and encourages us to take the time to understand ourselves and our place in the world. It's a reminder that simply going through the motions of life without taking the time to reflect on our choices and actions is not a fulfilling or meaningful way to live. And this idea has resonated with me deeply throughout my life. But now let's go back to where it all began. In this episode, we will explore the wisdom of the philosophers from Socrates to modern-day giants, and how their ideas can help us navigate the complexities of life. We'll discuss the meaning of life, the nature of happiness, and how to live a life of purpose and meaning, even in the darkest of times. We'll look at the lessons they learned from their experiences and the challenges they faced, and how these lessons can help us overcome the obstacles in our own lives. The ancient Greeks were among the first to really think deeply about life. They had lots of questions like, what is life all about? What is the right way to live? What is good and bad? And how should I deal with problems? They wanted to understand the world around them and their place in it. Back then, there were no Google searches or TikTok videos for quick answers, so they thought long and hard about these questions. They talked and debated with each other and tried to come up with the best possible answers. Their conversations led to the start of philosophy, the study of wisdom. Let's start with Socrates. He's considered the father of Western philosophy. He was born in Athens around 470 BC, during a time when Greece was a powerful force in the Mediterranean. Athens was a center of trade and culture and had a huge impact on the region, but it was also a hotbed of political tension and debate. Socrates was born into this environment, and it shaped his thinking from an early age. As a young man, he was interested in politics and served in the Athenian army, but he soon became disillusioned with the corruption and short-sightedness of the leaders. He realized that many of the people in power were more concerned with their own interests than with the good of the city. This realization had a profound impact on him and set him on a new path. He decided to devote his life to philosophy and to the search for wisdom and understanding. Socrates wasn't a teacher in the traditional sense. He didn't write down his thoughts or have students in the conventional sense. Instead, he wandered around the city of Athens, engaging people in conversation, asking questions, and challenging their beliefs and ideas. He would go to the marketplaces and the agora, the main public space in Athens, and talk to anyone who was willing to listen. He was known for his sharp wit and his ability to ask probing questions that helped people see things in new ways. One of his most famous quotes, "I know that I know nothing," sums up his approach to philosophy. He believed that true wisdom begins with the realization of our own ignorance. He challenged people to question their assumptions and to be open to new ideas. This was a radical idea at the time, and it made him controversial. The Athenians eventually grew tired of his questioning and his willingness to challenge their beliefs. They saw him as a threat to the social order, and they accused him of impiety and corrupting the youth. In 399 BC, he was put on trial and sentenced to death. He was given the option to leave Athens and live in exile, but he refused. He chose to stay and drink the poison hemlock, rather than compromise his principles. This act of courage and conviction made him a martyr for the cause of philosophy. His students, including his most famous student, Plato, continued his work and kept his memory alive. Next up is Plato. Plato was born in Athens around 428–427 BC, into a wealthy and influential family. He was a contemporary of Socrates and a student of his philosophy. However, unlike Socrates, Plato was a writer, and his work left a lasting impact on the development of philosophy. After Socrates' execution, Plato founded the Academy, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. Here he taught a new generation of philosophers, including Aristotle. Plato's philosophy was deeply influenced by his mentor Socrates, but he developed his own unique ideas and theories. He was particularly interested in metaphysics, the theory of knowledge, and ethics. His most famous work, The Republic, is a dialogue that explores the nature of justice, the ideal state, and the concept of the philosopher king. In this work, Plato presents his theory of forms, which posits that the physical world we see is only a shadow of the true reality which exists beyond our senses. The world of forms is perfect, eternal, and unchanging, and it is accessible only to the philosopher who is able to use reason to look beyond the appearances of things. Plato's philosophy had a profound influence on Western thought, and it continued to be studied and debated for centuries. His ideas on justice, on the ideal state, and on the nature of the human soul remain relevant today. Then we have Aristotle, the student of Plato, who was born in the Greek kingdom of Macedonia in 384 BC. He was tutored by Plato for several years at the Academy, but he eventually went on to develop his own philosophical system, which was more empirical and less speculative than Plato's. Aristotle was a prolific writer who covered a wide range of topics from logic and metaphysics to ethics and politics. He was particularly interested in the natural world, and he made significant contributions to our understanding of biology and the physical sciences. Aristotle's philosophy had a huge impact on the development of Western thought, and it was studied and debated for centuries. His ideas on logic and reasoning, on ethics and politics, and on the nature of the universe remained influential for over 2 millennia. After Aristotle, we come to the Stoics. Stoicism was a school of Hellenistic philosophy founded by Zeno of Citium in Athens in the early 3rd century BC. It was a response to the growing materialism and moral decay that had taken hold in the ancient world. The Stoics believed that virtue and wisdom were the key to living a good life, and that one should strive to live in harmony with the rational order of the universe. The Stoics taught that emotions like anger and fear were destructive and should be controlled. They believed that the wise person was one who could remain calm and composed in the face of adversity, and who could accept whatever fate had in store for them with tranquility. The Stoics were a diverse group of thinkers, and their ideas were shaped by the historical context in which they lived. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, lived during a time of great upheaval and change in the ancient world. He witnessed the rise of Alexander the Great and the subsequent decline of his empire, as well as the growing conflict between the Greek and Roman worlds. The later Stoics, such as Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, lived under the rule of the Roman Empire, and they faced the challenges and opportunities that came with it. Despite these differences, the Stoics shared a common set of beliefs about the nature of the universe, the role of humans in it, and the way to live a virtuous life. Their ideas were highly influential in the ancient world, and they continue to inspire and resonate with people today. But philosophy didn't die with Greece, and Rome. It was reborn in the hands of Christian and Muslim thinkers, who sought to unite divine revelation with human reason. A new question arose: how could faith and reason live together? This was the challenge of the medieval age. Now, most people view the medieval world as a time of darkness, and I get why. When you look at Europe specifically, it's easy to focus on the bad things. There was a lot of war. There was a lot of poverty. Life expectancy was quite low. But there was so much more going on. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Because when you look at places like Islamic Spain and Christian Europe, you see these two sides of humanity wrestling with big questions about faith and reason. They debate, they disagree, but they're doing it in good faith, honestly trying to figure out how these things fit together. So let us take a journey back and see how the medieval world imagined faith and reason working together. We're going to start in Baghdad, Iraq. Back in the year 900 CE, at this point, Baghdad was the largest city in the world. It was a cosmopolitan hub, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together side by side. But unlike the religious wars happening elsewhere in the world, here in Baghdad, those differences didn't divide people. Instead, they brought them together around shared interests, like philosophy. You see, at this time, Islam was experiencing what's called the Islamic Golden Age, a period of cultural, economic, and scientific advancement. People from all backgrounds were welcome to study anything they wanted as long as it was done respectfully. And this meant that Baghdad was home to some of the best minds in the world. Among them was a man named Al-Farabi, often called the second teacher, after Aristotle, the first teacher. He was born into a wealthy Muslim family, received an excellent education, and traveled throughout the Middle East before settling down in Baghdad. Now, although he was deeply religious, Al-Farabi was not a cleric. He was a philosopher and a statesman who believed that every ruler should be a philosopher king, someone who guides their people not only politically, but also morally and intellectually. He wrote extensively on ethics, metaphysics, politics, and music. But among his most important works is a book called The Best State, where he describes his dream of a virtuous city. In The Best State, Al-Farabi creates a fictional city ruled by a philosopher who governs with wisdom and justice. This ruler isn't elected based on popularity or wealth. They're chosen because of their knowledge and understanding of the divine order. The ruler's job is to make sure everyone in the city lives according to the highest ideals of Islam. Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? Well, according to Al-Farabi, it's not enough to be a philosopher king. Every citizen in this ideal state is expected to pursue wisdom and virtue. For him, philosophy and religion were not enemies, but allies. Two different languages describing the same truth. Philosophy gave rational arguments to support religious teachings, while religion provided symbolic stories that the masses could understand. Together, they created a society that was not only politically stable, but also intellectually vibrant. It was a place where people could freely explore ideas without fear of persecution, as long as they respected the city's core values. Al-Farabi wasn't the only one with these kinds of ideas. Over the next century, another Muslim philosopher named Al-Ghazali would challenge these ideas. He criticized what he saw as the excessive rationalism of earlier Muslim philosophers, arguing that reason alone could not lead to a proper understanding of God or the nature of reality. According to Al-Ghazali, reason was limited and fallible, while revelation from God was the ultimate source of knowledge. He accused his fellow Muslim philosophers of contradicting religious teachings and warned against relying on reason to understand matters of faith. Now, Despite these criticisms, Al-Farabi's ideas continued to influence both Islamic and European thought for centuries. His concept of the virtuous city served as a model for political and religious leaders across the world, while his emphasis on reason and moderation helped pave the way for a more tolerant and inclusive understanding of Islam. His work bridged the gap between religious tradition and philosophical inquiry, showing how these two seemingly opposing forces could work together to create a more just and enlightened society. Our next stop takes us to Muslim Spain, where another great philosopher named Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, was pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Unlike Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd was not a philosopher king. He was a judge who found himself in a position to defend philosophy when it was under attack. After Al-Ghazali's criticism of Muslim philosophers became popular in Spain, Ibn Rushd felt compelled to defend his fellow thinkers in their pursuit of wisdom. He saw firsthand how political and religious conflicts were hindering the progress of knowledge, and he was determined to do something about it. In response to Al-Ghazali's accusation that Muslim philosophers contradicted religious teachings, Ibn Rushd wrote The Incoherence of the Incoherence, a powerful defense of Aristotelian philosophy and its compatibility with Islam. In this groundbreaking work, he argued that reason and revelation could never truly contradict each other, for both came from the same source, God. This argument changed how people thought about the relationship between faith and reason, paving the way for a new era of intellectual exploration. But Ibn Rushd's contributions did not end there. He was also a prolific commentator on the works of Aristotle, whose ideas had a profound impact on medieval Europe. In fact, it was Ibn Rushd's commentaries on Aristotle's work that introduced many European scholars to the great works of Greek philosophy. His clear and concise explanations of Aristotle's complex ideas made the ancient texts more accessible to medieval thinkers, helping to preserve and transmit classical knowledge from one generation to the next. This role as a bridge between ancient and medieval thought earned him the title, the Commentator, a fitting tribute to his legacy as a scholar and interpreter of Aristotle. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean Sea, another great thinker was making waves in Christian Europe. His name was Thomas Aquinas, and he was a Dominican friar and one of the most influential theologians and philosophers of the medieval period. Thomas Aquinas was born in 1225 in the Kingdom of Sicily, which was part of the Holy Roman Empire at the time. From a young age, he displayed a remarkable aptitude for learning and was sent to study at a prestigious monastery in southern Italy. Here, he immersed himself in the works of the great philosophers of antiquity, including Aristotle, whose ideas would later form the basis of his own theological system. In addition to his philosophical studies, Thomas Aquinas also received rigorous theological training, becoming a member of the Dominican order and eventually rising to the position of provincial behizicaria as a theologian was not without controversy. In 1268, Pope Innocent IV asked Aquinas to write a defense of the recently concluded Fourth Lateran Council, a major event in the Catholic Church's history. However, Aquinas was already working on a more comprehensive project, the Summa Theologica, and he requested permission to incorporate his defense into this larger work. When the Pope granted his request, Aquinas wrote the first two parts of the Summa Theologica, presenting a systematic and logical defense of Catholic doctrine. The third part of the work remained unfinished due to Aquinas' preoccupation with other projects. But even in its incomplete form, the Summa Theologica stands as a monumental achievement in medieval theology. In this work, Thomas Aquinas attempted to prove the existence of God through reason alone, famously using 5 different arguments known as the 5 ways. He also developed a comprehensive account of Christian doctrine, explaining concepts such as sin, grace, and the sacraments in clear and logical terms. The Summa Theologica was a groundbreaking work that demonstrated the compatibility of reason and faith. Aquinas argued that faith was necessary to understand matters of salvation, but that reason could be used to comprehend the natural law and the existence of God. This approach paved the way for future generations of Catholic theologians and philosophers, and the Summa Theologica has remained an influential work throughout the centuries. In fact, Thomas Aquinas was such a brilliant mind that even Jewish scholars studied him. In particular, they were fascinated by his ability to combine faith and reason, something that had been a central concern of Jewish philosophy for centuries. Jewish thinkers had long grappled with the relationship between revelation and reason, and Aquinas' approach provided a new perspective on this age-old problem. One Jewish scholar in particular, Moses Maimonides, was greatly influenced by Aquinas' work. In his own writings, Maimonides sought to reconcile revelation and reason, arguing that both were necessary for a complete understanding of Jewish law and theology. Maimonides was born in Spain in 1135, but his family moved to France when he was still young. They faced persecution, however, and eventually resettled in Jerusalem, where Maimonides continued his studies. He became a leading rabbi and physician, serving as personal physician to Saladin, the Muslim ruler of Jerusalem. But his greatest contribution to Jewish thought came in the form of his book, The Guide for the Perplexed, written in the mid-12th century. In this work, Maimonides grappled with the relationship between faith and reason, arguing that both were necessary for a complete understanding of Jewish law and theology. Like Aquinas, he recognized the limitations of reason alone and acknowledged the necessity of faith in matters of divine revelation. But unlike Aquinas, he did not attempt to prove the existence of God through reason. Instead, he focused on the rational aspects of Jewish law, demonstrating that it was internally consistent and comprehensible through human reason. This approach helped pave the way for future generations of Jewish philosophers, and the Guide for the Perplexed became one of the most influential works in Jewish theology. And although they were separated by religion, by time, and by place, Maimonides and Aquinas would have felt right at home in Baghdad alongside Al-Farabi and Ibn Rushd. These four thinkers represent the best of medieval philosophy, a time when reason and faith were not seen as rivals but as partners in the pursuit of wisdom. So the next time someone tells you that science and religion are at odds, remember the medieval world. Remember Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd, Aquinas, and Maimonides. They understood the limits of reason and the power of faith. They knew that philosophy and religion weren't supposed to fight each other, but the harmony between faith and reason would not last forever. As Europe entered the Renaissance and the age of science, philosophy began to walk on its own, and sometimes in direct opposition to religion. I think, therefore, I am. Ah, yes, the legendary René Descartes, widely considered the father of modern philosophy. Descartes, who was born in France in 1596, didn't mean to rewrite Plato's Republic, and so in Meditations on First Philosophy, Descartes embarked upon a project of radical doubt, questioning everything: clear and distinct ideas, mathematical truths, sense data, the existence of an external world, even the existence of the self. All of it was up for grabs. The one thing Descartes refused to question was the very act of thinking. If nothing else was certain, he knew he was thinking, therefore he was. Thus, Descartes introduced us to the famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am," which in French is "je pense, donc je suis." Now, if you've taken any introductory philosophy courses, chances are you've heard this quote before, but most likely you haven't heard the story behind it. More importantly, you probably don't know what Descartes did next. In his discourse on the method, Descartes applied this way of thinking to the natural world and developed a new approach to understanding the universe. Forget complicated syllogisms and ancient authorities, Descartes said. Start instead with simple, clear, and distinct ideas and work your way up. How do we know that the world exists outside of our minds? Descartes famously asked. Well, let's doubt that it does, that everything we see and feel and hear isn't really there, and then try to imagine what it would be like if the world weren't real. You can't, can you? Not really? Well, then it seems more reasonable to conclude that the world actually does exist. With this, Descartes opened the door to modern science. As Isaac Newton and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz independently discovered the laws of calculus, they built directly on Descartes' methodological foundations. This radically altered the way humans understood the natural world. And even though Descartes himself was deeply religious, his method placed human reason at the center of philosophy rather than deference to ancient thinkers or the dictates of the church. But across the Channel in England, Thomas Hobbes was painting a darker picture of humanity. In his book Leviathan, published in 1651, Hobbes described a world without government. According to Hobbes, human beings are naturally selfish and violent. In a state of nature, there is no right or wrong, good or bad, only what you can get away with. To avoid the chaos of an endless war, of all against all, people agree to give up their natural rights and submit to a powerful government. This social contract creates artificial morality. People are bound by laws and are punished when they break them. The sovereign power, whether in the hands of a king or an elected parliament, has the right to use force to maintain order and protect its citizens. But what about religion, you ask? Well, according to Hobbes, it should be controlled by the state. He feared that differences in religious beliefs would cause endless conflict. So he argued that the sovereign should establish a state religion and punish those who dissent. While Descartes and Hobbes both rejected traditional authority, then, Hobbes wanted to use state power to enforce conformity. Descartes, on the other hand, thought that genuine knowledge had to be freely and rationally attained. But neither of these men were nearly as radical as the German philosopher Baruch Spinoza, who was born in 1632 and died in 1677. Spinoza lived during the height of the scientific revolution, and he, too, believed that the world could be understood through rational and scientific means. However, unlike Descartes, he didn't believe in God at all. This was extremely controversial because Spinoza was Jewish and members of the Jewish community in Amsterdam excommunicated him for heresy. Not to mention he was openly gay at a time when homosexuality was illegal and could get you thrown in prison, so he spent much of his life in relative obscurity. Nevertheless, in his magnum opus, The Ethics, Spinoza argues that God and nature are identical, what philosophers call pantheism. He claims that the universe is governed by a single substance, and that our finite minds can understand this substance through reason alone. Everything in the universe is part of this substance, including human beings. We have no souls that survive after death, and our actions are determined by the laws of nature. Religious experiences, miracles, revelation, and divine law are all human inventions. These ideas were shocking, to say the least. But they laid the foundation for modern secular thought and paved the way for modern liberalism. As for where the middle ground lay between these extreme positions, well, that's where John Locke comes in. Born in 1632, the same year as Spinoza, Locke lived a relatively privileged life. He eventually became a tutor to the future King of England, James II. But when James II came to power and tried to impose Anglicanism on the Dutch Reformed Church, Locke disapproves. So he fled to France and wrote his famous second treatise on civil government. Now, the main argument of this book is that people are born with natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and the role of government is to protect these rights. When a government fails to uphold its end of the bargain, citizens have the right to overthrow it. In Locke's mind, then, philosophy can help improve society and even inspire revolutions. At the same time, however, he never abandoned his religious beliefs, and he argued that faith cannot be forced, famously writing, "The natural rights of mankind are given by the God who made them." For Locke, then, philosophy could serve the useful function of defending and reforming society without abandoning religion. In fact, Locke's ideas inspired the American Declaration of Independence over 100 years later. These four philosophers, Descartes, Hobbes, Spinoza, and Locke, embody the transition from medieval philosophy to modern philosophy. But what exactly distinguishes these two different kinds of philosophy anyway? And how did the early modern period set the stage for modern philosophy? Well, to answer the first question, medieval philosophy was largely concerned with defending and explaining Christian doctrine. Philosophers like Augustine and Aquinas took religious dogmas as their starting points and reasoned out the consequences. They saw philosophy as a handmaiden to theology and were content to play a secondary role. Early modern philosophers, on the other hand, began to question traditional authority. They weren't satisfied simply defending or explaining religion. They wanted to find new foundations for knowledge and explore new ways of understanding the world. They were willing to challenge religious ideas and even abandon them entirely. But why did this happen? Well, during the early modern period, the world was changing fast. The printing press spread new ideas quickly across Europe. The Protestant Reformation challenged the authority of the Catholic Church, and science offered new ways of understanding the natural world. The medieval unity of faith and philosophy was shattered, and now a new question emerged. What if truth could be found without religion at all? This tension characterizes the entire early modern period, and it culminates in the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Voltaire and David Hume go even further. They openly attack organized religion and advocate for toleration and separation of church and state. Consider David Hume's essay, Of Miracles. Here Hume argues that since all evidence for miracles is anecdotal, we have no reason to believe that they actually happened. Or consider Hume's argument for skepticism in matters of induction. Just because we've observed that the sun will rise tomorrow, doesn't mean that it actually will. We can't know anything for certain, according to Hume, except our own observations. We can't even know that there's such a thing as an external world. The idea that human knowledge is limited to experience has remained extremely influential in philosophy and paved the way for modern skepticism. So to sum up, the early modern period marked a transition from medieval philosophy to modern philosophy. Medieval philosophy was largely concerned with explaining and defending religious doctrine, whereas modern philosophy questions traditional authority and explores new ways of understanding the world. The tension between philosophy and religion during the early modern period paves the way for the Enlightenment. During the Enlightenment, thinkers like Voltaire and Hume openly criticize organized religion and advocate for toleration and separation of church and state. The old battles between philosophy and religion had entered a new stage by the 19th century. Battles where once theologians held the upper hand, now philosophy had its turn to strike back. The Industrial Revolution and scientific progress had shifted the foundations of society. Political revolutions had changed how people viewed authority. Traditional ways of life were disrupted, cities were swelling with new inhabitants, and traditional certainties were questioned. Faith alone was no longer enough. Philosophy had to step in and ask, if God is no longer the center, then what is? This period marks the beginning of modern philosophy, and we're going to see how it gave birth to some of the most influential philosophies ever. Let's start with Søren Kierkegaard, a deeply religious man living in Denmark in the 1800s. He criticized how philosophy and Christianity had become too abstract and institutional. He felt that true faith wasn't found in churches or doctrines, but in a personal relationship with God. This leap of faith required a passionate surrender, a personal commitment that went beyond the rational. His idea of the leap of faith might seem like a retreat from the rationalism of Descartes, but in reality, it is the ultimate affirmation of the power of reason. It is only because we can think the possibility of a relationship with God that we can then leap to actually having one. Kierkegaard showed that religion and philosophy weren't necessarily opposed. He paved the way for future thinkers who would try to reconcile the two, and he remains relevant today, in a world where many wrestle with questions of faith and reason. Meanwhile, across Europe, Friedrich Nietzsche was writing his radical critique of traditional morality and religion. Now, when Nietzsche says that God is dead, he doesn't mean that God has literally died. Rather, he's pointing out that the belief in God is dying. Nietzsche argued that modern science and secularism had undermined the foundations of traditional morality and religion, leaving people without a sense of meaning or value. He saw the consequences of this crisis in the nihilism that he believed was spreading throughout Europe. Nihilism is a term that comes from the Greek word kinos, which means empty. It refers to a state of mind where one feels that life is meaningless and without purpose. It's a feeling that arises when people reject traditional beliefs and values without replacing them with new ones. Nietzsche feared that if people lost faith in God and rejected traditional values, they would fall into this nihilistic abyss. So what should we do? Nietzsche proposed a solution in his concept of the Übermensch, which translates to overman. This Übermensch is not a literal superhuman, but a metaphorical representation of the kind of person he thought humanity needed to become to move past this crisis. Nietzsche challenged people to create their own values and to live according to those values, even in a world without God. Though controversial and misunderstood, Nietzsche's ideas have had a profound impact on modern thought, influencing fields from philosophy and literature to psychology and art. But there is more to come. Let's now look at Fyodor Dostoevsky, a Russian novelist who grappled with similar themes in his literary works during the same period. Works like The Brothers Karamazov reflect the existential crisis of modern man. They explore themes of doubt, faith, morality, and redemption, in a world where traditional religious and philosophical certainties are being challenged. These novels don't provide easy answers. Instead, they force readers to confront difficult questions about the nature of good and evil, the existence of God, and the meaning of life. Dostoevsky's characters often find themselves at odds with the dominant intellectual and cultural trends of their time. Just like the philosophers of this period, his exploration of faith and doubt, for example, mirrors Kierkegaard's philosophical inquiries, the conflict between belief and reason, tradition, and modernity, all themes that dominated the philosophical landscape, are given a human face in Dostoevsky's novels. He humanizes these abstract philosophical questions, making them more tangible and emotionally resonant for readers. Through his character struggles, we are challenged to examine our own beliefs and the foundations of our morality. We're forced to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in. It's this confrontation that makes Dostoevsky's work so powerful and enduring. His exploration of existential themes continues to resonate with readers today, reminding us of the complexities of the human condition and the enduring power of faith and doubt in a rapidly changing world. Now let's move on to the 20th century and the ideas of Jean-Paul Sartre, a French philosopher who developed a form of existentialism. His famous quote, "Existence precedes essence," encapsulates his philosophy beautifully. This means that in his view, humans first exist, and then they create their essence or their nature through the choices they make. For Sartre, we are thrown into existence without any predetermined nature or purpose. There's no divine blueprint, no essence given to us by God or nature. Instead, we are condemned to be free. We are condemned to create our own essence through our actions and decisions. Our existence precedes and determines our essence. This idea challenges the traditional philosophical view that human nature is fixed and given. It rejects the notion that we are born with an essential nature that dictates our behavior and our choices. Instead, Sartre argued that we are free to define ourselves. We are responsible for creating our own identity and our own values. We are what we make of ourselves. This places a heavy burden on human beings. We are not only free to choose, but we must choose. Our choices, according to Sartre, shape not only our individual identities, but also the world around us. This philosophy had a huge influence, especially on the younger generation in France and elsewhere. It provided a framework for understanding the complexities of human existence in a rapidly changing world. Simone de Beauvoir, a French philosopher and writer, was also part of this movement. She was in a long-term relationship with Jean-Paul Sartre. Beauvoir applied the principles of existentialism to gender roles and identity. Her work contributed significantly to the development of feminist theory. She argued that women, like all humans, are free and responsible for creating their own identities. This challenged the prevailing societal norms and expectations placed upon women at the time. Her work helped pave the way for future generations of feminists who fought for equality and challenged traditional gender roles. However, not all existentialist thinkers rejected religion entirely. Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher, grappled with questions about being itself. He saw the need to return to the fundamental question of metaphysics, the nature of being. Heidegger argued that we had lost touch with the question of being in our everyday lives. He tried to reawaken this wonder and questioning through his work. His idea of care is central to his philosophy. It highlights the importance of our engagement with the world and the people around us. It's not just a feeling, but a way of being in the world. His work has influenced various fields like theology, literary criticism, and even architecture. Gabriel Marcel was another thinker who combined existentialist ideas with Christian faith. He grappled with the tension between faith and reason. Marcel argued that faith doesn't contradict reason, but instead enriches and deepens our understanding of the world. He emphasized the importance of mystery and wonder in religious experience. His work offers a different perspective on the relationship between philosophy and religion, suggesting that they can complement rather than oppose each other. Overall, the period from the 1800s to the 1900s was a watershed moment in the relationship between philosophy and religion, starting from Kierkegaard's call for a more personal relationship with God, through Nietzsche's challenge to traditional morality and religion, to the existentialist explorations of human freedom, essence and meaning by thinkers like Sartre and de Beauvoir. This era saw a deep questioning of traditional beliefs and values, whether it's the leap of faith, the death of God, the idea of the Bermensch, or the emphasis on human freedom and responsibility. The ideas that emerged during this period continue to shape our world today. They challenge us to examine our beliefs, to confront the complexities of human existence, and to find meaning in a world where certainties are fading. This period wasn't just about conflict, it was also about dialogue. Thinkers like Marcel showed that philosophy and religion could engage with each other, learning and growing from their interactions. It's a reminder that our search for truth and understanding is a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey that we can take together, embracing both the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead. This period was a significant chapter in the story of philosophy, but it's not the end of the story. As the 19th century closed, philosophy stood at a crossroads. Kierkegaard had called for a leap of faith, Nietzsche had declared the death of God, and Sartre would later confront the weight of radical freedom. The old certainties were gone, and humanity was left searching for new foundations. Each religion is studied through major philosophical themes that have emerged within each tradition. The 20th and 21st centuries brought philosophy and religion into a new battlefield: science, technology, and globalization. The old debates of faith versus reason were now joined by questions of evolution, psychology, politics, and even artificial intelligence. The result was a reshaping of traditional certainties and the emergence of entirely new perspectives. Amidst this transformation, some voices stood out. One of the most influential was Bertrand Russell, a fierce critic of religion. In his 1927 essay, Why I Am Not a Christian, Russell argued that belief in God was not supported by logic or evidence. He questioned the reliability of religious experiences and criticized the use of faith as a foundation for belief. Instead, he emphasized the importance of science and rational inquiry as better tools for understanding the universe and guiding human conduct. Russell's skepticism reflected the intellectual climate of his time. It was an era when scientific discoveries and technological advancements were challenging traditional religious narratives. The theory of evolution, for instance, had already sparked significant controversy by suggesting that humans had not been created in the image of God, but had instead descended from earlier forms of life. Russell's influence was profound, inspiring generations of thinkers who found his arguments compelling and comforting. However, his perspective was not universally embraced. Many religious individuals and institutions strongly opposed his views, seeing them as a threat to the foundations of faith. This tension between scientific rationalism and traditional faith continues to resonate today, shaping discussions about the role of religion in a modern world. Meanwhile, another voice from the past, Karl Marx, also gained prominence. Marx, the father of communism, had earlier described religion as the opium of the people. In his essay on Ludwig Feuerbach, he viewed religious beliefs as a tool used by the ruling classes to control the masses and maintain their power. Marx argued that by offering hope of a better existence after death, religion discouraged the oppressed classes from challenging the status quo in the here and now. As Marxism found expression in the 20th century through revolutions in Russia, China, and beyond, religion often found itself under attack. In these regimes, it was frequently suppressed in favor of political ideology. The marriage of philosophy and religion to state power presented yet another front in the ongoing struggle between these two domains. But it was not solely about power. Psychology also played a part. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, saw religion as an illusion rooted in humanity's deepest fears and desires. His ideas challenged conventional thinking by suggesting that religious beliefs were not divinely inspired, but rather reflected the workings of the unconscious mind. According to Freud, the human psyche is driven by instinctual desires that conflict with societal norms and expectations. Religion, in his view, provided a means for individuals to grapple with these conflicts by projecting their inner turmoil onto external forces. Religious rituals and beliefs then become a way to manage anxiety and secure a sense of order and stability in an inherently chaotic existence. A student of Freud, Carl Jung, disagreed. Jung, who developed analytical psychology, saw religion quite differently. While acknowledging the role of the unconscious, he argued that religious symbols and myths were not merely projections of personal neuroses, but rather universal expressions of the human psyche. For Jung, religion was a language of the unconscious, a means by which the psyche communicates its deeper wisdom and insights. He believed that religious experiences and symbols could be powerful sources of meaning and healing. This introduced a new layer to the relationship between philosophy and religion, one that delved into the depths of human psychology and the complexities of the mind. But not all modern thinkers abandoned faith. Paul Tillich, a 20th-century Christian philosopher, reinterpreted traditional doctrines to make them more compatible with modern thought. He redefined God as the ground of being, a source of ultimate concern that could transcend traditional images and accommodate contemporary perspectives. Similarly, Alasdair MacIntyre, in his book After Virtue, argued that moral philosophy could not survive without the traditions carried by religion. This dialogue between faith and doubt continued to deepen as the 20th century progressed. Figures like William James and Rudolf Otto explored the realm of religious experience, emphasizing the personal and emotional dimensions of faith. Meanwhile, thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre challenged traditional religious narratives and offered alternative sources of meaning in a rapidly changing world. The rise of religious fundamentalism in various forms also added a new urgency to these conversations, raising questions about the compatibility of religious tradition with modern scientific discoveries and ethical considerations. Despite the challenges, many theologians and philosophers continued to seek common ground between faith and reason, exploring areas of convergence and understanding where philosophy illuminated the depths of religious experience, and where religion offered new perspectives on philosophical dilemmas. In Islam, thinkers like Fazlur Rahman and Said Hossein Nasir worked to reconcile modern thought with spiritual heritage, highlighting the relevance of Islamic teachings in addressing contemporary issues. This engagement between philosophy and religion did not remain confined to academic circles. Public discourse became increasingly infused with religious themes as questions of morality, identity, and the role of spirituality in public life took center stage. The late 20th and early 21st centuries ushered in a new phase in this interplay. The dawn of the internet age brought with it unprecedented opportunities for dialogue and debate. Social media platforms became virtual town squares where philosophical and religious ideas were exchanged, challenged, and sometimes polarized. The digital realm offered both promise and peril. On one hand, it facilitated the spread of religious teachings and enabled interfaith conversations on a global scale. However, it also gave rise to echo chambers and filter bubbles, reinforcing biases and sometimes inciting hostility towards differing viewpoints. This highlighted the urgent need for thoughtful, nuanced engagement across divides. Meanwhile, rapid technological advancements, particularly in fields like artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and neuroscience, introduced novel ethical dilemmas. Questions about the nature of consciousness, the limits of human enhancement, and the implications of advanced technologies for society and the individual pushed the boundaries of traditional philosophical and religious inquiries. Issues like animal rights, environmental ethics, and global inequality also gained prominence, urging both philosophers and theologians to consider the broader impacts of human actions on the world and future generations. This era also witnessed a growing interest in spirituality and personal growth. Amidst the complexities of modern life, many individuals sought practices and philosophies that offered solace, meaning, and a sense of connection. New Age movements, mindfulness practices, and the exploration of altered states of consciousness blurred the lines between traditional religious boundaries, creating hybrid forms of spirituality that incorporated elements from various traditions. This diversification of religious landscapes was further fueled by increased migration and intercultural exchange. As people from different religious backgrounds came into closer contact, it led to interfaith marriages, the formation of multicultural communities, and new religious movements that synthesized diverse traditions. This cultural fusion not only enriched religious expressions, but also raised questions about identity, belonging, and the evolving nature of community in a globalized world. Furthermore, the tension between traditional religious values and LGBTQ rights became a prominent issue, particularly in the United States. While some religious institutions upheld traditional teachings on sexuality and marriage, others began to embrace more inclusive and affirming stances, reflecting a broader societal shift towards greater acceptance and equality. This internal debate within religious communities challenged long-held doctrines and forced a re-evaluation of the role of faith in an increasingly diverse and accepting world. Moreover, the rise of atheism and agnosticism, particularly among young adults, posed a significant challenge to established religions. Public figures like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens articulated arguments against theism, emphasizing the lack of empirical evidence for divine claims and criticizing religious influence on public life. This resurgence of skepticism prompted religious thinkers to engage more deeply with philosophical arguments. and to find ways to express their beliefs in a manner that resonated with those who questioned traditional narratives. Finally, the relationship between philosophy and religion today is marked by a growing recognition of the limitations of either domain alone. Many thinkers argue that addressing complex contemporary issues requires an integrated approach that draws upon both the insights of religious traditions and the rigor of philosophical analysis. This has led to interdisciplinary fields like theological anthropology and the philosophy of religion, which seek to bridge the gaps between these two historically intertwined domains. The challenges facing humanity today, from climate change and social inequality to questions about the meaning of life and the nature of consciousness, are too complex to be tackled by any single discipline or worldview in isolation. Philosophy and religion, with their respective strengths and perspectives, can complement and enrich one another in addressing these pressing issues. Philosophy, with its emphasis on reason and critical thinking, can help shed light on the logical and ethical dimensions of religious beliefs and practices, fostering deeper understanding and articulation of faith. Religion, with its focus on lived experiences, spiritual insights, and ethical teachings, can offer a rich context for philosophical reflection, and can inspire new ways of thinking about perennial questions about the human condition. In essence, the story of philosophy and religion is a story that never truly ends. It's a continuous dialogue, a push and pull, a tension, and a blending that mirrors the complexity of the human journey itself. We've seen how philosophy has shaped religious interpretations, and how religious experiences have inspired philosophical inquiry. But perhaps most importantly, we've glimpsed the enduring relevance of these ancient questions in our own lives. Questions about identity, purpose, suffering, and the nature of a good life remain as pertinent today as they were thousands of years ago. The tools may change, the answers may evolve, but the search itself is timeless. So as we bring this exploration to a close, let us carry forward the spirit of inquiry, the courage to question, and the openness to understand, whether we walk the path of faith or reason, or perhaps a bit of both. The search for meaning never ends. If this story inspired you, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more wisdom that connects past and present.